1998. A US military jet severs the wire of a cable car in the Italian Alps. The crew may face court-martial for the deaths of 20 people. Investigators must discover how a routine training flight ended in catastrophe. Was it an accident triggered by instrument failure, or the result of a reckless joyride? There is intense suspicion that the US military will protect its own at all costs. For the first time, the Navigator tells his story.
It wasn't Marine Corps jet, it's uncharted wire. It was Top Gun slaughter in the snow.
Disasters don't just happen. They're a chain of critical events. Unravel the clues and count down those final seconds from disaster. (1998), February the 3rd, 1513. A US Marine prowler jet flies low through the Dolomite Mountains in Italy. The crew immediately know they've hit a wire.
Climb, climb, climb!
The pilot takes emergency action. He climbs high, fast, in case they need to eject. The crew assess the damage.
It looks like we got damage to the right wing and the vertical stabilizer.
To add to his problems, fuel is leaking fast. He knows a wire strike can bring a plane down, and he's 90 kilometers from base. Captain Ashby is a highly experienced pilot, but there's a good chance he won't make it. The flight started in northern Italy as a routine training mission from Aviano Air Base.
Hey, Schweitz!
1,300 hours. Pilot Captain Richard Ashby prepares for the flight. This will be his last mission with the squadron. He's won a coveted promotion to fighter pilot.
For us today, over some peaks, some lakes. Well, there'll be a lot of hang gliders, so we're gonna have
Navigator Captain Joe Schweitzer.
5,000 feet.
He will plan the route and guide the pilot through the hazardous terrain.
Then we're gonna head due south along these ridges and valleys.
The Prowler is a 4-seater jet, and in the back will be Captains Rainey and Seagraves.
Any questions?
It's all clear.
On an operational mission, their role is to work the electronic jamming equipment.
Come on, give me a smile.
They are part of a US Marine squadron deployed by NATO over the war-torn skies of Bosnia. If attacked, the Prowler's only defense is to fly fast and low, which is what they'll be practicing today.
I love to fly low because it's where I really get to do my job. I get to control a portion of the flight, and I love terrain. I like to, interpolate that and figure out where we are and make it work.
1435. The Prowler, call sign EZ-01, approaches the runway.
EZ-01, you're cleared for takeoff.
The weather conditions are perfect for flying and skiing. 90 kilometers west of Aviano is the Fiemme Valley. At its center is Cavallese, a small mountain town that overflows in the winter with skiers. It's popular with families from all over Europe. 1445. The sun is out, the conditions are perfect, and the slopes are busy. 1452. Flight EZ-01 is under orders not to fly less than 305 meters above ground level. But As the plane descends, the radar altimeter jams. It's the instrument that should warn them if they get below the minimum height.
I start to stick, and normal procedure is you turn it off, you cycle it off, and if it begins to track again, you keep going. If it doesn't, you get off the low-level route. So we did that. It continued to track. Everything looked good. We made the decision, press on.
The Prowler is a dated and temperamental aircraft.
We're flying a 1970s aircraft. Things like that happen all the time.
In Cavallese, skiers move between the slopes and the town in cable cars. 1507. The Prowler approaches Lake Garda. The crew know that it's a favored location for paragliders and climb to a safe height.
At that time, everything was going as it's supposed to go. You feel like the crew's connected, the crew is responding. I thought we were doing pretty well.
The ski gondolas in Cavallese work as a pair. One fills to capacity, 20 people, whilst the other contains only the operator preparing for the return trip. Easy 01 enters the Fiemme Valley. 1513. The packed cable car is over 100 meters from the valley floor.
Everything looked good, looked at the altitude, looked at where we were. So I'm the navigator, and I want to find out exactly where we are in the valley. I look down, there's a lake that I want to find. I look up, and all of a sudden I see a wire in front of my face.
The jet hits the cables at over 870 kilometers per hour. The collision severs the 6-centimeter thick wire. The sound of the stricken jet reverberates through the valley. The people of the town instantly know something is very wrong.
We looked up and saw a plane flying vertically into the sky. I still remember the two back engines on fire.
In the Prowler, the crew don't know what the wire was, but it has crippled their jet.
And all of a sudden, we look at the wing, and it was like a shock. And it was like a chainsaw, went about a quarter of the way through our aircraft. And it is, the best way to describe it is there is 10, 15 rattlesnakes on your lap, and you gotta get them all if you're gonna live.
In Cavallese, the fire service spring into action. The firemen prepare themselves for the devastation of a plane crash. Even so, they are shocked by what they find.
Ma quando siamo arrivati sul posto abbiamo visto la funivia.
We saw the cable car was on the ground.
Con le funi distese.
The cables were everywhere, and all around there was a large patch of blood.
Di sangue polverizzato che circondava la funivia.
In the air, the Prowler crew battle for their own lives, unaware of the devastation on the ground.
We had pretty extensive damage to the aircraft. We lost our combined hydraulics. The pilot, he's really got to fight it, the flight controls.
This damage leaves the plane in serious peril. It will take all of the crew's skill and experience to keep the plane in the air.
Aviano approach, this is EZ-01. We need to snap to Aviano.
EZ-01.
2 minutes after the crash, Navigator Schweitzer radios the Aviano control tower.
See, approximately 10 miles west of the field.
EZ-01, we have radar contact. What is the nature of your emergency?
We have a damaged aircraft. This time we're looking to land.
How many souls do you have on board, and how much gas do you have?
In Cavallese, the hardened emergency crews face the grim reality of the scene.
Poi alla fine, purtroppo,
Unfortunately, despite the speed of our response, there wasn't really any medical attention we could give them. Because the injuries sustained by the cable car passengers when they hit the ground were so serious.
Gravissime lesioni causa proprio l'impatto forte sul terreno.
There are no survivors in the wreckage. The Prowler is still 10 kilometers from base, and the fuel gauge is dropping rapidly.
I mean, fuel is life. You're losing gas, and then the hydraulics are out.
The hydraulic systems power the jet's flight controls and its landing gear. The crew have no way of knowing if they can get the plane back to base. The damaged Prowler jet is almost impossible to fly. The crew know they're up against it.
It literally took every ounce of our collective being to get that jet back.
As the Prowler approaches the airbase, the crew can't tell from instrumentation whether their landing gear is functioning. They need the control tower to make an instant visual assessment.
Easy 01, this is Aviano approach. Your landing gear is intact and you're clear to land on runway 5.
With the extensive damage to the jet, they'll have to make an emergency landing. The crash teams scramble and prepare for the worst.
This huge sense of urgency. One of the most intense experiences I've ever been through. You're alive. You're so happy to be alive. It's almost like we willed the plane to land. Once we left the plane, the Air Force Crash, Fire, and Rescue came. They secured the jet, and it's like, what just happened?
The crew know that damaging a multi-million-dollar plane is serious, but it gets worse.
Our CO came in, our commanding officer, and said, hey, I don't know how to tell you guys this. You guys hit a wire that was attached to a gondola, and 14 people were killed. And probably, I mean, I would say that was probably the lowest moment in my life. And the best way to describe that is if your heart just shattered.
The death toll rises to 20 as the victims' bodies are identified.
I cried like a baby. And you cry because you ask yourself the question, why did I live and why did they die?
By the following morning, the crash has become a major international incident. The 20 victims are from 6 different countries. There will be a military inquiry. Investigators need to know why a routine flight ended in catastrophe. The world is watching and waiting. Emotions run high. The victims' families, the local community, and the world's media want answers. Now, by rewinding the crucial events of that day and going deep into the investigation, we can reveal the truth behind what caused the tragic events in Cavallese. Any incident involving the U.S. Marines comes under the jurisdiction of the Naval Criminal Investigation Service. Lead NCIS Special Agent Mark Fallon flies to Cavallese. He wants to start with the physical evidence of the damaged jet. But outrage in the local community threatens to derail his investigation.
We had some concerns for the safety of the crew. There were protests against the United States at the time. Cars were being vandalized. I believe a few cars were firebombed at the time. So the safety of U.S. citizens and American service members in the area, particularly this crew, was paramount.
The incident is generating damning headlines.
The media was just crushing us. One of the phrases that I just remember was jokey. Jokey means fun, means playing games. It wasn't Marine Corps jet, hits uncharted wire on training mission. It was Top Gun slaughter in the snow.
Suspicion is widespread that the crew were reckless, and the U.S. military will try to cover it up.
There was a feeling, a climate at the time that the U.S. would, in their opinion, whitewash this investigation and would not hold those Marines accountable.
And suspicion is only deepened when the U.S. Supreme Commander in Europe makes a startling and unprecedented decision. He takes the investigation away from NCIS and gives it to the Marine Corps.
So Marine Corps General Mike DeLong became the person responsible for the Command Investigation Board and the investigation into the incident.
The Marines are now in charge. But they'll still need professional NCIS investigators, like Mark Fallon. He is expected to investigate the case, but let the Marines write the official report. He fears this development will compromise the inquiry.
From an investigative perspective, it was rather impacting because at this point you did not have professional criminal investigators who do this for a living, collecting evidence and running the investigation.
Now, under the direction of the Marine Corps, Fallon and his team continue their work. How could a plane run into cables that were 190 meters below its minimum flying altitude? Was there anything wrong with the jet that might explain why they were so low?
In this case, it was having to look at the equipment, trying to determine if equipment was functioning properly, just to establish what the actual truth was.
The Prowler stores flight information on a mission data recorder. It is sent for analysis. But there is also a radar altimeter that tells the pilot the plane's height above the ground. It should have sounded an alarm well before they reached the height of the cable car wires. NCIS need to check out this radar altimeter.
There were no deviations in the radar altimeter reading. They were totally within normal specification. I felt confident, based on the folks who did the testing of it, that the radar altimeter was functioning properly.
It suggests the crew should have known exactly how low they were. But then Fallon's team make a discovery that may show what the crew did on the flight. They took a video camera on board.
Give us a smile.
Save it for the landscapes.
We took the tape and we brought it back to the technicians, the audiovisual technicians at Aviano Air Force Base, and we put the tape in, and the tape played blue.
The tape is either blank or it's been erased. The aircrew conceal using the camera. But Fallon's team discover a tiny piece of cellophane. It challenges the crew's story.
That was actually a small cellophane wrapper, appeared to have come off a videotape cassette.
And for an experienced investigator like Fallon, this doesn't add up.
They seem to have opened up a tape At least that was what our theory was when we saw this wrapper. And so for them to go to that much trouble and not tape the route seemed a bit unusual.
Fallon is suspicious that he's not being told the truth. But for now, he has to accept the tape is a dead end. The mission data recorder reveals the jet broke the 305-meter altitude limit more than once. It also shows that Captain Ashby exceeded the 830 kilometers per hour speed limit. This suggests a reckless flight. But there might be other evidence. Fallon retraces the route.
So we had to take investigators on the ground, and we had to go through the Alps. And we had to do what we call gumshoe work, knocking on doors and trying to see if witnesses can help us recreate what happened on that day with that flight.
He wants eyewitness testimony to support the data retrieved from the plane.
The witnesses that we talked to, we don't recall anyone who saw any plane as low as this one.
Both the mission data and eyewitness reports seem to suggest the jet flew below its minimum altitude and over the speed limit.
This crew and Captain Ashby tried to fly that jet as fast as he could, as low as he could, and unfortunately there were some catastrophic consequences that occurred.
The evidence so far makes the crew look reckless, but it's not the end of the line. Fallon's findings are handed to the Marine Corps to write the official report. This could form the basis of any criminal charges. As is usual in marine mishaps, Colonel Thomas Blickensderfer launches an internal investigation.
That is a privileged investigation. The pilots speak quite openly, write statements, and that is held within the Safety Administration Department. And whatever they say and do can't be held against them in any courts.
A mishap investigation is for Marine eyes only. But the situation is now escalating into an international diplomatic incident going all the way to the White House.
I told the Prime Minister of Italy, and I'll tell you, I will do everything I can to find out exactly what happened and to take appropriate action and to satisfy the people of Italy that we have done the right thing.
President Clinton had called the Italian premier that morning early and to pass on his words of encouragement. He passed words to the effect that you Americans just may not be operating out of my country anymore.
The loss of the Italian air bases would have dire consequences for NATO. The fate of the crew is weighed against the US strategic requirements in Europe. The report has to be declassified.
So now we're being told by the commanding general that we're not going to do a mishap investigation because we don't want to be viewed as finding out information and not being able to share it with the media and the Italian administration.
The report will combine the NCIS and the Marines' findings. Most importantly, it'll be in the public domain. And it will decide the fate of the crew of EZ-01. Marine Colonel Blickensderfer has all the evidence discovered by NCIS. But, as is standard practice in military investigations, he carries out further inquiries, starting with the crew's flight records.
Very good reputation, hardworking, very conscientious, no known reckless tendencies or anything like that. The pilot, Captain Ashby, he had just recently been chosen for the F-18 program. That meant he was chosen as basically one top aviator out of 100.
The crew's records show them to be experienced and proficient. But low-level flying is a specialist skill. Pilots need regular practice.
You should fly them almost every day, just to keep you up to speed on the relative motion of the airplane, how to coordinate with your navigator. If you don't fly at least a couple of times a week in the low-altitude regime, then you lose that proficiency of being able to sense all that stuff.
Budget cutbacks mean the crews are getting less and less flight time. Despite being one of the Marines' elite pilots, Captain Ashby hasn't flown low level in 6 months. Blickensderfer is beginning to see that it may not be as simple as individual pilot error. His attention now moves to the crew flight plan, specifically their maps.
We looked at the map and, wow, the mishap cable wasn't on the map.
But this region is world famous for its ski resorts.
We looked at an Italian map of the same scale, and you couldn't put your thumb on there without covering up a cable, which in turn was where all the ski areas were. So that was a real glaring problem.
Blickensderfer must find out why the cables aren't on the maps.
We called the National Imagery and Mapping Agency, and of course they were astounded. What they said was that the data for those cables had been inadvertently removed from their database.
This is not a mistake made by the crew. Then Blickensderfer makes another discovery. Crews have not been properly briefed on changes to the low-level regulations. Shortly before EZ-01 flew, the minimum AGL, or above ground level altitude, was increased.
The one-star Air Force general came over and said, "Hey, I heard they changed that altitude to 2,000 feet 3 or 4 months ago."
The squadron are questioned. All but one are unaware of the 2,000-foot rule. Blickensderfer and the Marine team pull together all the evidence for the report. NCIS agent Fallon's investigation of the evidence points at negligence. But Blickensderfer has uncovered reductions in crew training, errors on the map, and information not reaching the crew. These are systemic errors. It all goes into the report. But the Marines' top brass are worried. If the Corps are blamed for the accident, the US could lose access to Italian air bases. Blame has to be apportioned, and the final wording of the report is crucial.
We had very heated debates, almost arguments about taking information out, not putting it back in. When some of it did get put back in, it might have been written in a way that really wasn't that positive to the aviators, and almost in a way that was misleading and inaccurate.
A month after the crash, head of the investigation, Major General DeLong, presents the report.
Including the mishap leg, the mishap aircrew flew well below 1,000 feet, 300 meters, the briefed altitude, and exceeded the maximum airspeed by as much as 100 knots. We have concluded the cable strike was not a one-time altitude miscalculation.
The crew's fate will be decided in court, but by speaking out, DeLong has left no doubt about the view held by the Marine Corps.
The Commandant was hell-bent to hang that aircrew out to dry, and many people would say he may have been doing the right thing in order to save the basing rights in Italy.
We started not to feel part of the Marine Corps, and we called ourselves the leper colony. And just because we were out there.
It isn't looking good for the aircrew. They are repatriated to the US to face court-martial. Leading for the prosecution is former Marine pilot Lieutenant Colonel Couch.
The charges were involuntary manslaughter, which is basically the deaths of the 20 victims as a result of reckless or wanton conduct. It was also a charge for hazarding an aircraft.
If found guilty, the crew will face 20 years for every man, woman, and child killed on the Cavallese cable car. Joe Schweitzer faces the prospect of living the rest of his life behind bars. He knows he is on his own.
I knew that nobody else was going to help me, and I got to do this. I got to make this right. And, you know, in the Marine Corps, we talk about, you know, your mission, your objective. My new mission was the truth.
Schweitzer feels abandoned by the Corps.
The Marine Corps takes great pains to train its aviators, and it places great special trust and confidence in those aviators to fly their aircraft within the rules and regulations that are set forth. The Marine Corps met its responsibility.
The prosecutors are convinced the aircrew are jointly responsible. But they feel the strongest case can be mounted against the pilot and navigator. In the hope of securing a conviction, the decision is taken to offer the other two crew members a deal.
As we were proceeding to trial, one of the crewmen that was riding in the back of the airplane, Seagraves, Captain Seagraves, was given immunity.
In return for immunity from prosecution, Seagraves and Rainey give fresh statements. They suggest the other crew behaved strangely in the moments after the emergency landing.
The testimony of the two aircrew members that were in the back seat was that they immediately got out, ran off the nose of the airplane, and turned around and looked back to see Ashby and Schweitzer still sitting in the front cockpit.
Rainey and Seagraves' testimony that Ashby and Schweitzer didn't evacuate is stunning. Crews are trained to evacuate immediately after an emergency landing. When questioned, Schweitzer makes a startling admission.
The video camera. You know, I haven't thought of this thing in like forever, and I go to trash, let's take the tape.
They remove the tape from the camera and replace it with a blank one. They've taken a crucial piece of evidence. Schweitzer has never spoken publicly about his actions, but we can now revisit the flight of EZ-01 and reveal why he took the tape.
You walk through the flight, and I think, you know, this is what I start to see. We're 5,000 feet above Lake Garda, and it's a beautiful lake. I took the camera out. It was the last time I used the camera. I panned around, and I smiled in the camera.
According to the navigator, it was an innocent record of a happy flight. But when he learns of the death of 20 people, Schweitzer's smile for the camera haunts him.
My thoughts of my smiling face next to the blood and snow on CNN get more consuming and more consuming. And I made the decision, you know, I need the tape. And I said, Trash, give me the tape. And so the next day, I destroy the tape.
Schweitzer makes sure that the images of his smiling face will never see the light of day. But for Couch, evidence of what happened during the flight of EZ-01 has been lost forever.
My gut feeling is if there was nothing wrong with the way that flight was conducted, why did Captain Schweitzer burn the tape? It overrode their training as Marine Corps officers. If there was evidence in a case and it was destroyed, then that's evidence of a consciousness of guilt.
The prosecution believed that if the aircrew flew by the book, they wouldn't have burnt the tape. They intend to use this new information as additional proof in the trial. One year after the Disaster-Cable Car tragedy, the court-martial starts. The prosecution argue that Ashby had no excuse for flying lower than the minimum height of 305 meters, or 1,000 feet.
We were very confident with the evidence. And our confidence was from the fact that there was a 1,000-foot restriction for this aircraft. Unless your life is in jeopardy, unless the mission requires it, you fly by the regulations. And under these circumstances, it was 1,000 feet.
If Captain Ashby is going to avoid jail, the defense need an explanation for why the jet flew below the 1,000-foot restriction. They call a former Marine aviator, an expert in spatial orientation, Dr. Fred Patterson.
I told him that, I'll be happy to do this case. I said, it's part of my duty as an active duty officer, but I said, I got to tell you up front, you may not like the answers that I come up with.
Patterson's area of expertise is visual perception. He understands the complex mental calculations required of a military aviator. At high altitude, the pilot uses the horizon as a reference point. The horizon stays at a fixed distance from the plane, so it remains at a constant height in his field of vision. On the low-level route, Captain Ashby can't see the true horizon, so he picks the end of the valley as his reference point. As he approaches this reference point, the false horizon falls in his field of vision. To compensate, he dips the nose of the plane, making it descend. This is an instinctive reaction and begins to provide an explanation for why the pilot behaved as he did.
The pilot comes over the ridgeline and he immediately sets his sight picture of the horizon, which is about 37 seconds down the road where he's going to be at the end of the valley. To do that, you have to put in about a 1-degree nose-down attitude. And he's doing that subconsciously. He's not aware he's even doing it.
The rad-out should have warned the crew of their descent, but it had jammed once before. An intermittent fault with the rad-out could explain why the crew of EZ-01 were flying low in the Fiemme Valley. But not why they hit a cable they should have missed. Dr. Fred Patterson has developed a theory that might explain why the crew flew into a wire that 4 seconds before impact they were on course to avoid. He believes that Ashby unknowingly experienced a strange visual illusion at the moment he saw the wire.
Came out of nowhere, rose above the terrain. They thought it was above them and rising when they saw it.
Patterson's new and original theory forms the basis for the defense. It explains that choosing a fixed point on the horizon can give the illusion of objects appearing above the pilot when they are actually below him.
If he suddenly sees it and all he knows is he's about to die, and the only possible way he has is to lower the nose. He's going to jam that stick forward. And with his right hand, when he jams it forward, he can't help but putting in that slight left wing down, which is exactly the trajectory that that aircraft struck the wire at.
Patterson's testimony appears clear-cut, but a pilot's training includes learning to judge the distance from the ground.
When you go out into this valley, when you see cars, roads, trees, all of those things together give you an idea of how far you are from the ground. In aviation, military aviation, we call it the Mark I eyeball. That is the eyes that you have in your head.
Couch believes the crash is the aircrew's responsibility, and theirs alone.
We, on the prosecution team, came to call it the blame game. They wanted to blame it on the optical illusion. They wanted to blame it on the aircraft. They wanted to blame it on the squadron for the dissemination of information. What the defense was trying to do was to blame everything, but where the blame really did lie, and that was with the aircrew, Captain Ashby and Captain Schweitzer.
The defense argue that the Marine Corps must accept responsibility for lack of training and information not reaching the crew. Ashby's fate is decided by a jury of Marines. Half of them aviators. It takes them just over 7 hours to return a verdict. They find Captain Ashby not guilty on all counts.
When it was over and Trash was acquitted was just, you know, it was a great feeling, because I think we accomplished part of our mission, was to get to the truth.
The jury has found a fellow Marine not guilty. To many, it looks like the whitewash the international community feared.
There are two shocking things about this case. The first is that it happened to begin with. And the second is that Captain Ashby was acquitted for killing those 20 people.
I actually had a member of the jury come to me after the verdict and indicate that for the first time he was embarrassed as a Marine. I just feel that justice was not served.
The destroyed tape is not forgotten. Ashby is sentenced to 6 months for obstruction of justice. He and Schweitzer are dishonorably discharged. They are the only two people who know what happened on that fatal flight, when EZ-01 left 20 skiers just seconds from disaster. This much is certain. 40 minutes from disaster. EZ-01 takes off from Aviano Air Base. The ski resort of Cavallese is busy. 14:52. The Radout jams and is reset. EZ-01 continues its flight. Queues form for the cable car across the valley. 15:07. EZ-01 approaches Lake Garda, and Schweitzer videos the flight. "19 skiers and the operator set off. 20 seconds from disaster, EZ-01 enters the valley at 300 meters. They gradually begin to descend to 160 meters. 4 seconds later, Ashby sees the wire. Thinking it's above him, he dives. 15:13, wire strike. The jet is crippled. The gondola falls. All 20 occupants are dead. Today, Aviano is still a NATO base, but the Marines are no longer stationed there. To date, no one has been held legally responsible for the tragedy.
Don't miss American Weed Mile High Showdown, brand new and back-to-back this Friday night from 8. Seconds from Disaster is back after the break.